NFL head coach is under the most pressure going into the 2022 NFL season. Now, I want to lay out my criteria for how I did this list. First of all, let me say that this is not in order, so I don't want to hear nobody in the comment section saying, oh, JT, this guy should be first, second, blah. This isn't a list that I did based off who was on the most pressure. I literally just listed these guys in any order, so don't pay attention to how these guys come off the list because it doesn't matter. All you really need to pay attention to is who's on this list. And my criteria for this is that either these are head coaches who are one disappointing season away from being on the hot seat, or these are coaches that are already on the hot seat and have pressure to win now. So the first head coach that I'm going to start off with is Brandon Staley. Last year, the Chargers went 9-8. They missed out on the playoffs, and it was pretty disappointing because Brandon Staley was tabbed as this phenomenal, innovative defensive mind. He was formerly the DC of the LA Rams. He took the LA Rams defense from being average to the best in the league. He became the head coach of the Chargers, and this defense was incredibly underwhelming, to say the least. I was really disappointed. And not only that, but they missed out on the playoffs. You feel me? Many people had the Chargers as either a sleeper team who not only could get into the playoffs, but maybe win a playoff game. But that didn't even happen. They went 9-8. They were fairly inconsistent. Their worst performance of the season was when they lost to the Houston Texans. So with all of the talent that the Chargers acquired during this offseason, signing J.C. Jackson, trading for Khalil Mack, two of the biggest moves that they made on defense, this without a doubt is a playoff team. And on top of that, Brandon Staley is somebody who took a lot of risk last year. And there were some times when it paid off, and there were many times where it didn't pay off and it costed them games. So if the Chargers miss out on the postseason this year, he without a doubt is probably going to be on the hot seat. And if they even miss the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up parting ways with them. Because you underachieved for 2 consecutive years, and then you're really going to give him a third year? Because last year, many people were under the assumption that the Chargers were a playoff football team. And yeah, they didn't get into the postseason. So I don't know how the Chargers ownership would feel about having 2 back-to-back disappointing campaigns. So this is a big year for Brandon Staley. This is a really tough division, but there are many people out there who are picking the Chargers to win this division, so the expectations are really high. Now, let's not confuse our expectations with the expectations that the front office has, but with the moves that the Chargers have made and the money that they have kind of dished out, they're expecting to make it to the postseason, and anything less than that will be extreme disappointment. And if they end up missing out on the postseason this year, Brandon Staley could find himself on the hot seat or either without a job. Nathaniel Hackett, first-year head coach with the Denver Broncos. Listen, even though he's a first-year head coach, he hasn't coached a single game yet as the head coach for the Broncos. He's on this list because they hired him. And I guess many people were coming with the assumption that this move was made because it would increase the Denver Broncos' odds at landing Aaron Rodgers, but we already know how that turned out. However, they were able to get the next best thing and trade for former Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson. And when you have Russell Wilson, you plug him in, and essentially, this is a team that should be in the conversation for being the potential Super Bowl sleeper. Because for the last couple of seasons, right, what has been the narrative about the Denver Broncos? Oh, they're only a quarterback away. That's all they need. All they need is a quarterback. Well, you got that. You have a pretty solid offensive line. You have a really good group of weapons that Russell Wilson is going to be throwing to. Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, KJ Hamler. You have Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon in the backfield. So this is a pretty solid supporting cast that Russell Wilson has around him. The defense has some talent. However, with the new DC and whatnot. We don't know if he's going to be able to maximize this talent because Vic Fangio was a defensive-minded coach. So anytime you have a new coaching staff with some staff changes, you really have to kind of look at things from an open perspective because you don't really know what you're going to get out of the new DC, because just because you have talent doesn't mean that the team is going to play up to it. So for Nathaniel Hackett, this is a really big year for him, because there are many people who are expecting Denver to make it into the playoffs. And when you have a Russell Wilson on your team, somebody who is one of the winningest quarterbacks in the NFL over the last decade, you're going to have pressure to win right away. So this isn't a season for Denver to miss out on the playoffs. Denver has to make it right away, because you don't trade for Russell Wilson and say, okay, it's understandable if we miss out on the playoffs. The narrative with Denver over the past couple of seasons has been they're only a quarterback away. You have that quarterback position filled with one of the best in the game right now. So there's no reason why the Broncos should miss out on the playoffs. And if they do miss out on the playoffs, it will be incredibly disappointing. No excuses. Nathaniel Hackett in his first year has a lot of pressure to make it right away. And there's no reason why he shouldn't. The team is there. You finally have a legitimate quarterback. Denver should be in the postseason. And if they don't make it, Mike McCarthy comes up next for the Dallas Cowboys. In his 2 seasons as the head coach for the Dallas Cowboys, he has a record of 18-15. His first season, 2020, he went 6-10, but the Cowboys dealt with a lot of injuries, so we all cut him a lot of slack on that year. 2021, however, the Cowboys went 12-5. They won the NFC East division, but they lost to the 49ers in the wild card round, and it was really disappointing because there were a lot of Cowboy fans who expected the Cowboys to make a deep playoff run. And yes, Dallas Cowboy fans always have overly optimistic expectations, but last year I felt their expectations were pretty reasonable. The Cowboys had one of the best rosters in the NFL last season, and even I was surprised to see them get bounced out in the first round by the 49ers. I was somebody who was going to bat for the Dallas Cowboys. I was thinking that they would at least be able to make it to the divisional round or maybe the NFC Conference Championship game. But once again, this is a team that, despite having a talented roster, still underachieved in a sense. Because yes, you made it to the playoffs, but for the Cowboys, with what you had last year, Trayvon Diggs, Michael Parsons, Dak Prescott having a really good year, just for Dallas to just crash and burn in the opening weekend of last year's playoffs just was kind of unacceptable in a sense. It was kind of disgraceful in a sense. So for Mike McCarthy, the pressure is definitely building. And even if Dallas makes it to the playoffs, I think for Mike McCarthy to return as the head coach for Dallas, he at least needs to win a playoff game. And that may not make a lot of sense to some of you guys watching this video. You guys may say, JT, if a coach is consistently getting his team to the playoffs, why should he be in jeopardy of being fired or being on a hot seat? Well, when you have an offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, who is one of the hottest head coaching candidates in the league at the moment, I think the pressure is definitely going to build, because if you're Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy can't get it done, and you keep going one and done in the postseason, and you have one of the hottest head coaching candidates on your staff, you could just go ahead and give Mike McCarthy the pink slip and go ahead and promote Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore is somebody who already has been highly regarded for NFL head coaching jobs and also college football head coaching jobs. And I think there's even an occasion where Kellen Moore had his contract renegotiated by Jerry Jones to keep him as the OC in Dallas. So that just shows you how much Jerry Jones holds Kellen Moore in high regard. And then on top of that, you have Dan Quinn, who also was in the rumblings for a head coaching gig as well, with the job that he did with the Cowboys defense last season. So you have a really good coaching staff. And Mike McCarthy potentially could have 2 replacements for his job already on his staff. So if he doesn't end up delivering and Dallas ends up going one and done, or they don't end up doing anything in the playoffs this year, I think there's a high possibility that we could see him getting replaced by Kellen Moore, which is why I think that the pressure is really building. And for Dallas, this is a team that is still super talented. I know they lost a couple of key pieces. You lost Amari Cooper, La'el Collins, but you still have an overall really talented roster. You still have one of the most talented rosters, not only in the NFC, but in the whole entire NFL as a whole. So there's no reason why Dallas should lose in the wild card round. And there's no reason why they should even miss the postseason at all. And even though Philadelphia and Washington, both of those teams did get better, Dallas is still probably the most talented team in this division. Because for Philadelphia, there's a lot of things that are yet to be determined. We don't know how good of a head coach Nick Sirianni is, because even though Philadelphia went to the playoffs last season with a 9-8 record, they were 1-8 against teams with a record of 500 or better. So we don't know how good he is at making adjustments. We don't even know how much Jalen Hurts is going to improve as a passer. So for the Dallas Cowboys, this is still the best team in this division. And even if they don't win this division, they still need to do something in the playoffs, because there's no excuse for a team that has the kind of talent that the Dallas Cowboys have year in and year out to not be at least making it to the conference championship game, at worst the divisional round. So for Mike McCarthy, he has to make something shake this year for the Dallas Cowboys. I think that if they don't end up having a deep playoff run, I think he potentially could end up getting replaced. Ron Rivera, he's been with Washington for 2 years. He has a record of 14-19. They went 7-9 in 2020, and they also won the NFC East. It was one of the more surprising stories of the NFL. You got Alex Smith with his leg and everything that went on, potentially life-threatening. We didn't even know if Alex Smith was ever going to play another down in the NFL. He ends up beating the odds, helps lead Washington to the postseason, even though they played in a weak division. But then Alex Smith has some injuries. Then comes Taylor Heinicke, right? And Taylor Heinicke was kind of this unsung hero during the Washington football team's playoff loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because Taylor Heinicke balled out in that game. So there were many people who were thinking that, maybe this was Washington's time. But unfortunately, they end up not being able to live up to those expectations. They went 7-10. They missed out on the postseason. And they did have some injuries. Ryan Fitzpatrick got injured really early on. I think if he would have been able to stay healthy, Washington potentially could have snuck in over Philadelphia for that last playoff spot. So you improve the quarterback position by bringing in Carson Wentz. So even though Carson Wentz isn't regarded as a top-tier quarterback, he's still an upgrade from what Washington has had in the past. However, he does have the tendency to play extremely reckless at times. He doesn't take care of the football in big moments. He tries to play too much hero ball. He also hasn't been somebody who has gotten along with teammates all that well. So for Ron Rivera, he has to be able to weather the storm. And I think he has a good possibility of being able to do this. But you also have some injuries on the defensive side of the football, such as Chase Young, who many people were expecting to have a breakout year, being in the running for Defensive Player of the Year potentially, but his season came to an end. So for Washington, with Chase Young coming back, improving the quarterback position, this is a team that should at least be able to be in that conversation for either the 6th or 7th seed. And then, on top of that, the offense has improved. You draft Jahan Dotson in the first round. You're going to be pairing him up with Curtis Samuel, who also missed time last year due to injuries. So this is a really fantastic offense that Carson Wentz is going to be in. He's also going to have way more weapons to work with compared to what he had with the Indianapolis Colts. So for Carson Wentz and Washington, there's no reason why the Commanders shouldn't be able to make it into the postseason. They should at least be able to get a 6th seed or the 7th seed. And if they don't end up making it to the playoffs and they end up having another losing season, I think we could see Ron Rivera on the way out. Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule, if I was to rank all these coaches in order from the coaches who had the most pressure to the coaches who had the least amount of pressure, Matt Rhule most likely would be number one. In 2 seasons with the Carolina Panthers, he's 10-23, 5-11 in 2020. Okay, that was year one. But year two, in 2021, Panthers fans were looking for improvement. And although this wasn't a team that was ready to make it to the postseason, this was still a team that you would have thought would at least be able to make a push for either the 7th seed or potentially even the 6th seed. You know, they didn't have to win it, but you would at least thought they would be able to hang around in the playoff hunt a little bit longer than what they did. But Sam Darnold didn't play well. The whole team kind of didn't play well. The defense is still very good, but the offense has a lot of work that needs to be done. And they did bring in offensive coordinator Ben McAdoo. You drafted Matt Corral in the mid-rounds of this past year's NFL draft, but it still looks as if Sam Darnold may end up getting the start unless Carolina ends up trading for either Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo. So there is a lot of mounting pressure on Matt Rhule. This is year 3 now. This is a year now where Panthers fans are expecting to make it to the postseason. At least if you're not expecting this team to be horrible and you already lost faith. But if you're being realistic, you give a coach 2 years. His first year, he's supposed to get the locker room established. He's supposed to build up the culture. Year 2, you bring in some marquee free agents. And then year 3, that's when you should be able to put it all together and you should be able to make that playoff push. However, for Carolina, there's still a lot of questions on this team, and quarterback is one of them. And for Matt Rhule, I wouldn't want the quarterback position to be one of my biggest question marks, especially when I'm going into probably a make-or-break year for me. So for Matt Rhule, this is somebody who is tabbed as a team builder. And when you have somebody who's tabbed as a team builder, you should be seeing small improvements every single season. However, the Carolina Panthers didn't improve. As a matter of fact, they got worse. So, year 3, Matt Rhule with Carolina, this is a make-or-break year for him. Without a doubt, if the Panthers don't make it to the postseason, or they don't at least compete for a playoff spot, expect Matt Rhule to be in the unemployment line come the start of year 2023. Next up, I have Dennis Allen taking over for Sean Payton. That's the head coach for New Orleans. Dennis Allen, this isn't his first rodeo being the head coach in the NFL. He formerly was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders from years back, and that didn't go successful. He didn't really win too many games, but the Raiders didn't really give him much to work with. And on top of that, the organization still was not all that good. So with New Orleans, you have so many pieces to work with. You have one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. Your wide receiving core. You're getting Michael Thomas back. You're going to have Chris Olave. You have Jarvis Landry. Jameis Winston did some pretty good things in the small sample size that we saw from him. You're going to have Pete Carmichael taking over as the play caller, which he has already called plays several times throughout his tenure on the New Orleans Saints staff. The offense has always been top 3, top 5 when Pete Carmichael has called plays. So the offense is going to be there. The defense has already been phenomenal since Dennis Allen has been the Saints defensive coordinator for the last couple of years. This is one of the best defenses in the NFL. So for Dennis Allen, anything less of a playoff appearance is a major disappointment. And if he misses the playoffs in year 1, I think that there's a high possibility that he may not return. Because Brian Flores, depending on what goes on with his lawsuit, he could be in the mix for this head coaching job if Dennis Allen doesn't work out. You're also going to have Kellen Moore. You're going to have a lot of options out there if you're New Orleans. So for Dennis Allen, I think out of all of the first-year head coaches who have the most pressure to succeed, he definitely is probably tied up there with Nathaniel Hackett. Even though I think Nathaniel Hackett, there's a good possibility that maybe he could return. But for Dennis Allen, I don't really think there's any excuses for him for why New Orleans shouldn't make it to the postseason. I mean, your roster still, although you did lose a couple of marquee players such as Teron Armstead, Marcus Williams, you replace those with some really good pieces. Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May. The offensive line is still going to be amongst the best in the NFL, even though the left tackle position is a little bit of a question mark because you don't know how well Trevor Penning is going to perform in year one. However, this is still a very talented roster, one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. So anything less than a postseason appearance is a disappointment. And last on this list, I have Luv Smith. Going into his first year as the head coach for the Houston Texans, the reason why he has pressure is because I don't think Houston is really going to give him a fair shot. I really think that this is just a one-year thing. And if Luv Smith ends up panning out, then he pans out. But the only way I think Luv Smith keeps his job is if Houston wins 7 or 8 games, which I think is really unrealistic, considering the fact that this is still one of the worst teams in the NFL from a talent standpoint. However, you do have Davis Mills, who showed a lot of promise his rookie season last year. He's the second best rookie quarterback behind Mac Jones. You have Pat Pendleton as your offensive coordinator this year, somebody who is highly respected and is held in high regards in the NFL world for his play calling. I think he played a really critical part in Justin Herbert's rookie season. He played really well, and I think Pat Pendleton was a big part of that. But for Luv Smith, I mean, he has a lot of pressure because I don't think Houston is really going to give him a fair shot. I don't think they're going to give him 2-3 years. I think he's just somebody to pass time until they're able to get the head coaching candidate who they really wanted, which some people speculate that it was Brian Flores, but with the pending lawsuit, it made things a little bit murky. So I don't really know if Houston views Luv Smith as the long-term option, which is why he has to be on this list, because he has pressure right away to not only be better than what Houston was last year, but kind of to win 7-8 games, man. I really think that's the only way Luv Smith could potentially keep his job, or either the Houston Texans have to be in a bunch of one-possession games that they lose that came down to the wire. So for Luv Smith, man, I just think that he's in an unfair situation. I don't really think he's getting a fair crack at having the opportunity of being the head coach for Houston. I just think that he's just there as a bridge head coach until the Houston Texans can finally get the head coach that they really want. So this is it for my NFL head coaches that are under the most pressure going into the 2022 NFL season. Let me know some guys who you guys would have put on this list. Some people are probably going to say Cliff Kingsbury, but I left him off simply for the fact that I think that with the fact that the Arizona Cardinals have gotten better every single year under Cliff Kingsbury, and also you got to take into account that they made it to the playoffs last year, I don't think that he's going to get fired if Arizona misses out on the postseason this year. But potentially he could be, but he recently just got an extension, I believe. So I still believe that he isn't really under the microscope that these other head coaches are. But if you want to put him on this list, I understand that. But this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you leave a 5-star review if you're listening to this on streaming platforms. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure that you go ahead and check out the JT Sports Podcast. Every video that's uploaded on the channel is available in audio format on every single podcasting platform. Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from, the JT Sports Podcast is available.